So thank you, Hannah, for a wonderful introduction. I'm really excited to be joined by our panelists today and to moderate this conversation on the role of digital innovation. I mean, especially in light of the way the world was rocked by the pandemic, digital innovation was crucial for simulating a new sense of normal, quote unquote, and even developing new ways of communicating and collaborating. And as Hannah mentioned, we've actually touched on some of these points during our annual summit. But for the purposes of this conversation, we wanted to reframe the discussion for an Indo-Pacific context. So with all of that in mind, I want to ask this question to all of our panelists. In a post-COVID global economy where the acceleration of digital transformation and innovation is a given, what is, in your view, the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity that businesses and countries will face in the next 5 years? And so we can go ahead and start with Sujith, then move on to Joshua, and then end with Lovneesh.
Chelsie, thanks for having me, and really value the opportunity. You know, it's interesting. There was a survey done by McKinsey where they surveyed about 100 CEOs, and 90% of them said they are, they're fully focused on creating a hybrid work environment. That means it's not going to be, at the physical office definitively or at home definitively. It's going to be some combination of the two. And I think when you take a look at that, we're facing a once in a generation opportunity to reimagine how we engage each other, whether that's at work or, whether we're engaging the government, what have you. And when we could see each other in the offices or by traveling, to each other, point solutions like email were good enough, right? But in our region and in the current context, we really need to look at tools that are secure and seamless and drive continuity regardless of where you are, whether it be home or work or otherwise. And I say secure because we used to be able to get away occasionally with using, consumer grade social media and messaging apps. But today, collaboration really means sharing immensely more sensitive data. And we would traditionally than we would have been traditionally, which means that we have to be much more vigilant about ensuring these channels that we choose, and share on are secure. They also need to, have a single pane of glass so that you can see every other system that you need, and that fundamentally has inclusivity as part of the design. So for us, how we've pivoted, we use Slack exactly for this reason to evolve towards a digital HQ, as we like to call it. So instead of thinking of a physical HQ where you go to work, you can think of it as a ubiquitous platform that comes to you and where work gets done. It's just, as I mentioned before, it's that single pane of glass where it connects our teams, our customers, our partners, and every other system that we require so work can flow. And it's all designed to be organic and conversational.
I'll pick up right where Sujith left off. I just want to thank Concordia for having this important discussion. It's clear that the Indo-Pacific's time is here. It's been a long time in the making. In some ways, we can debate who came up with the term. The Japanese certainly have a good claim to it. But even what we mean by Indo-Pacific region is challenging. But I think one thing that's true in terms of what is the challenge, Chelsie, that you've identified, I think Sujith talked about geography and kind of the way that we work. I think added to that, you have demographic challenges. In a country like Japan and certain developed nations, the population's decreasing. In other areas, whether it's India or Africa, they're rising. And so then you get to the crux of the question of equity. Is our system that we have put in place, whether it's of government, a social contract, or whether it's the corporate citizen, in terms of how much responsibility do we all have to protect the environment, the only one world we have that we see playing out right now in Glasgow? I think these challenges are going to reach their climax in some ways in the Indo-Pacific, because it's clear that this is an Asian century. The world looked very different 100 years ago. It was very much a World War II, post-World War II environment. Now we're moving into an area of both competition and cooperation. I think governments and private sector and individuals have a big role to play here. So how we navigate that together will really determine, in my mind, how we can kind of live in the world that we want to build for the future. And I think the digital transformation that we've seen once in a generation, once in 100 years, as Sujith said, will be critical to being able to achieve those win-wins and not just having zero-sum games.
Yeah. So let me pick up from where Joshua said, Chelsie, and thank you for having me here. It's indeed a privilege to be here. Let me start with the opportunities that lie because of the acceleration of digital during COVID. I think one area that all of us would acknowledge is the whole area of sustainability and the role of technology. That's a big opportunity that has opened, and sustainability, all of us are aware, is no longer a buzzword, but it has come into the CEO's agenda. Investors are looking for ESG. Customers are looking for sustainable products. Employees want to work for companies who are actually onto sustainable. I think the biggest opportunity for us is use technologies to have a zero emissions, zero waste, and zero inequality world. That's something. The larger question is, how do we do it? Now, when I talk about zero emissions, the idea is to embed now, going forward, as the next wave of digital technologies inclusion and infusion into what we do, the metrics of sustainability into the processes as we take it forward, right? So that is the key as we move forward, and companies like ours actually are coming out with products which will help companies do that. Similarly, on the whole idea of the regional business networks, so providing market access to one side of the suppliers to customers across the borders, and in the process also enabling the recycling, is also enabling the larger sustainability part of it. So that's, and obviously the skilling and the digital. And when I talk about skilling, the inclusive workforce, it's both digital skilling and digital for skilling. That's where there is a big opportunity lies. So that's one area there where I feel is an opportunity that all of us are geared, and technology companies like ours have a dual role, both as an exemplar as well as an enabler, in terms of showing what can be done, and then helping the companies drive that agenda. Second area of opportunity that I wanted to highlight is the acceleration of digital as a part of this whole pandemic adoption, if I can use the word that we have gone in, has brought in another area of the whole consumer experience management. So that is something we have become so used to managing the operational efficiencies using technology, improving systems, optimizing, and hence I think now the time has come wherein the experiential data also needs to get merged with the operational data, and that's a big opportunity. The opportunity is both from a consumer participation into the systems, and the example of a public transport system. I was so used to managing it on my fuel efficiency, on my on time performance, on my mileage, and whatnot. Today the connectivity to remote areas, as a consumer feedback also is important, and that is what is actually leading into the experience, the why part of data rather than the how part of data, that is actually merging in. So two areas that I distinctly see shaping the opportunity landscape is, one, the whole shift towards sustainability; second, ensuring the consumer experience management as one discipline.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Thank you all for sharing that. I think your responses made perfect sense to me, and there are definitely a lot of places for opportunity. But I do believe that there are also a lot of places for challenges and a lot of gaps in the systems that we have. I mean, as we grappled with this unprecedented global crisis, our systems and technology were heavily challenged to kind of have to adapt to a completely new landscape. And in some cases, we just weren't fully prepared for a crisis of this magnitude. And a lot of like the places that we were lacking and were exposed. So in your view, how can corporations and governments work together to facilitate rapid digital transformation that can ensure resilience in the face of disasters? Dr. Lovneesh talked about sustainability, but wanting to hear more from everyone else, we can start with Joshua, then go with Lovneesh, and then Sujith.
Great. No, I
Great
think
thoughts.
that the key word resiliency has been one that we've been thinking about for this entire COVID pandemic. And if there's one place in the world that I think is in some ways synonymous with resiliency, it would be Japan. Before this most recent pandemic, 10 years ago, there was a triple disaster. And I think Japan is kind of earthquake prone and kind of naturally kind of predisposed to these disasters. And I think to your question, Chelsie, which is a great one, how do governments and private sector and citizens work more closely together? I think the pandemic has exposed what our biggest challenges are in terms of showing us what is not there for all people. There are some places like where we're sitting right now in New York, we have greatest infrastructure and everything else in the world. Right next door, people don't have access to that. And so I think the key is the public-private partnerships that Concordia has been championing since your beginning is one of those key areas. You're seeing that more actively in America now. You're seeing it in the Congress and the Build Back Better. You're seeing it at the State Department. I think these public-private partnerships, which have always been nice slogans, need to become real, because I think people are going to hold their politicians, particularly in democracies, accountable. And whether it's kind of trains and rail systems that get people from their homes to the office, or it's the broadband internet that allows people to stay home and do their work uninterrupted, that's going to be key. And I think that we see in Japan a model of what that might look like, but it's easy to do that in a small island nation versus some of the larger countries we're talking about. And if these countries that have incredible resources and incredible political commitment with the new prime minister there can't accomplish this, we've got a larger problem. So I think the other piece is the private sector has to think in broader terms. It's not just about your company's interest. Can you be both a national champion, a regional champion, and global champions all at the same time? Because I think a lot of these companies actually might have more power than some of the smaller countries that we're all working with to bring this to reality, Chelsie.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a very, very important point that you raised, Chelsea, about the government and the private sector collaboration. I think the models of this collaboration also are now undergoing a significant change, and there is a big stakeholder perception and an impression that yes, this is not the technology shift is not a one stakeholder challenge or responsibility. It's a multi-stakeholders, and we already see some initial examples of very good reference case studies where government and industry have come together to actually answer. I'll give you one very small example of India. In the second wave of COVID, the oxygen tracking became a challenge in India because of oxygen shortage and the sheer number. The government set up a digital tracking system for oxygen, and then it was observed that many of the oxygen manufacturers were SAP customers, and that's when we came together to make it live in terms of real time availability of information. Now, this was obviously need based. This was obviously a call of the hour, but what the areas that we see gradually emerging where private sector contribution to the government initiatives in terms of business ambitions matching the government priorities obviously are skilling. Skilling is a big area, and particularly digital skilling. Industry has a talent shortage. Government has the mandate of improving employability, and that's a big area on this. The second area in our region particularly is the whole enablement of SMEs, with a huge contribution by SMEs into the economy of the region, and still the SME sector being more or less informal and yet to be formalized. That's where the low cost technology solutions in terms of awareness, accessibility from private sector supported by government is another area that government and industry can come together and actually offer, and then obviously I mentioned as the third area is sustainability, where the two partnerships have to go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
So Chelsea, I'd love to key off of this word that Joshua used, resilience. I think he's absolutely right. When I had just moved here, and when some of the pandemic was hitting, and I remember seeing some organizations, completely blindsided by what happened. They had literally come to a grinding halt. Other organizations, especially some of the retail outlets, shifted their models very quickly, right? So they started combining efforts and doing takeout instead of relying on people and foot traffic coming in. We had, other types of organizations taking their employment base and moving to an e-commerce model, and taking these incredibly skilled, incredibly well-engaging people and putting them in roles where they could drive incredible amounts of loyalty, but through e-commerce. So these pivots were something that we took note of and we needed to learn from. And when you think about governments and corporates, I think if there's anything we've learned it's that we need to start with a work from anywhere mindset if we're going to drive continuity and move, from our perspective, as many of these workloads into the cloud and drive continuity, so that and drive resilience, whether it be face to face, and trying to deal with safe distancing measures that prevent us from being, um, at the office or so forth, or even natural disasters due to global warming. We also need to ensure that information can flow freely and securely across borders to drive collaboration and increase levels of mission critical activities. I think we all have seen what's happened with the supply chain. There's so many production halts because parts are not moving, shipments are not happening, logistical chains are being challenged. So we really need to review the existing government regulations and make sure they're compatible with what's becoming the new normal in terms of the current environment. I think the other area that's also important is the enablement of digital skills, right? So whether it be within an organization that's looking to pivot and they're looking to reskill their own people, or folks on the outside looking to reskill. And we work with a number of universities and organizations to skill up, especially here in Singapore. We've been working with an organization called Skills Future for exactly that purpose, and driving our platform Trailhead, where we have about 85,000 learners reskilling on digital skills to help drive the Salesforce ecosystem.
Yeah, no, thank you. You actually touched on quite a few points, including the role of businesses in bridging digital skills gaps in the journey to digital transformation, and making sure countries are no one's getting left behind, right? While countries are innovating and other people are just increasing, we don't want to leave anyone else behind in that journey. And so, actually, just sticking with Sujith right now, Salesforce is one of Concordia's leading partners, addressing inequality gaps and the role of tech and global innovation to combat these challenges. And so, how can companies like Salesforce support Indo-Pacific economies in their digital transformation? You mentioned digital skilling, but if there's anything else you wanted to dig into in terms of that.
Yeah, look, there's a number of ways. We recently went sort of live with our entity in Thailand as an example, and we like to say that we're not Salesforce in Thailand, it's Salesforce Thailand. We're very much a part of the DNA. You may know that we have the 1-1-1 model: 1% of our time, 1% of our product, 1% of our equity, to really contribute back to the community. So there's a lot that organizations can do to be a fundamental part of the fabric of the communities that they're serving, and we really fundamentally believe in that. And so we do. We encourage our partners. We encourage everyone, our customer ecosystem, to really follow this 1-1-1 model and to be contributing back, so that we can drive sustainability. Many of the things that Lovneesh mentioned, in addition to helping businesses pivot. Obviously we're a leader in CRM and fundamentally connecting customers with their own customers, and doing that through mobile, AI, and so forth. So, any organization that's looking in this current context to drive that work from anywhere sort of angle, we can help them with, and we'd love to talk to them and support them in that journey. It's very important to us. We want to make sure that they're continuing to be able to function and be able to drive good value into the market. And of course, as you touched on, the whole area of digital skills enablement, I encourage folks to look at our Trailhead platform. It's free content. It's available. It's a website. It literally is a way for people to become their own entrepreneurs and take control of their future and be very, very digitally relevant. So I think there's a number of things we can do and model for the community, and really being a part of it and having a direct impact on it is critical.
All right, thank you. I wanted to kind of move towards Joshua and to talk about kind of the role of Japan and the Japan society in this region. And can you tell us how exactly Japan is leading the region in innovation? You mentioned earlier, just like in terms of resiliency, preparing for natural disasters where Japan is very prone. In what other ways is Japan kind of leading in the region in terms of innovation?
Yeah, let me take a big step back. I can't possibly answer that question in the time we have remaining, but hopefully all of you will get a chance to come to Japan site and we can talk about it. But I think that my private sector colleagues have really hit the nail on the head about the importance of looking to the future. And I think if I use my own organization, we've been around for 115 years. Really, we were defined by our geographic space. We're the first landmark building in New York that was designed by a Japanese architect. We're right across the street from the UN at the Japan House. We did everything in person. And so the idea of using digital programs didn't really sit well because so much of what we were producing was exclusive content for our members and those that knew us. The pandemic has forced us to kind of go into the public domain, to have digital programming, to be on YouTube, all the things that the private sector has led us on. And I think that in some ways, we represent the country that we try to connect with the US. Japan is this beautiful, unique island that has an ancient civilization, but is very much leading in particular areas in the modern world. Japan's known for its technology. But I have to say, since the 1980s of the Sony Walkman, it's not cutting edge like it used to be. I think nowadays you see more Chinese and American companies that are leading the way. And so the question is, how can Japan play a role? And it might be similar to what some of the companies and the countries of the Indo-Pacific are thinking as well, in terms of how is India going to lead the future with its large population as the largest democracy. Japan is obviously one of the largest economies in the region. There's a lot of capital available, and there's a real emphasis on innovation and entrepreneurship for the future. And I think with the new prime minister in Japan, there's going to be a higher emphasis on regional diplomacy, regional integration, being able to solve problems together, whether it's with the Quad countries, the India and Australia, or whether it's other countries that are trying to find ways of thinking about China's rise, whether that's Vietnam or the Philippines or Indonesia. So I think there's a big role here, not just for governments, but the private sector in terms of how we think about our supply chains, the resiliency that comes there, the future of work, AI, all these things that we've just touched the surface of today, but are really important in terms of partnering and a role for a nonprofit like ours that brings together private sectors and the government as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And also keeping an eye on the time, I want to turn the mic over to Lovneesh and kind of tie this back into education. And so the past 18 months have shown the importance of technology in education and continuing to provide education to the next generation and people today. And so what lessons do you think we learned in a remote learning world, and what key takeaways can we bring towards education in the future?
Okay, thank you. I would say in education there are two aspects of technologies. One obviously is creating the digital talent pool. That's one. Second, using digital for creating the talent pool. That's the second part. I think we have a dual role there in terms of ensuring that the requirements and the other point that I wanted to highlight is the education and skilling, if I combine the two, cannot be looked at in isolation from the whole work organization and redesign that is happening. Now, example, additive manufacturing engineers, the IoT engineers were roles, were jobs, were employment opportunities which were not existing, even few years back. And that is where is the demand that is growing, the cybersecurity professionals and whatnot. So that's where the demand. So that the education part cannot be viewed in isolation from what's coming as a result of digital technologies application. So the point that I'm trying to raise is digital would be a horizontal in the whole education space, and that needs to translate back into the academic curriculum. That needs to translate back into the university design, and obviously the university alliance programs by us. For example, we run this SAP Skills University in Singapore. We also work with the number of universities. That collaboration is extremely important, and I do feel that government has a huge role in facilitating this kind of collaboration in ensuring that the youth passing out of institutions are work ready, are employable, and that's and we also see number of such examples. I can talk. Joshua spoke about India. I can talk about India. when we initiated a number of programs in India on digital skilling, and the response and the effectiveness is extremely positive in terms of the impact that we see. Now, that's the third angle that I wanted to highlight. And for all this, the larger point is, how do we make it a reality? In terms of, so there are a number of models. One, government's providing a platform on which industry can come together and provide this. Second, industries joining. For example, in the Australia, we have a number of platforms together set up by number of companies and whatnot. The last point that I had is, we need to look at education, not from a one time effort, but as a dynamic phenomenon now, because the need for reskilling also is equally important in the technology world as we get back, and that needs to get translated to this. And that's where the whole collaboration scenario would actually emerge going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. None of these things can exist in a vacuum. And we unfortunately have run out of time, but I thank you all for taking the time to talk through some of the challenges that we're going to be facing over the next few years, many years. And hopefully we'll see how digital transformation transforms this particularly important region. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.